YouTube, what is good? Today we're going to be taking this photo right here, which straight out of camera is boring, weak, uninteresting, and transforming it into this photo right here, which is ready for your Instagram and hopefully will get you 1,000,000 likes or something like that. Hopefully it gets you a lot of likes and the notifications are going crazy on your phone. You're all excited. I'm gonna be showing you how I do it. So I've talked about this in the past on previous editing videos. When it comes to editing photography, the method you use to edit the photo is usually determined by where the photo is going to end up. So if a photo is gonna be in your Instagram story or on your Twitter or somewhere low key, you're probably not gonna spend a lot of time editing it. You'll probably end up using a pretty quick workflow, which I happen to have a video about. It's linked in the description on this video. But let's say you have a photo that's going to be in a corporate advertising campaign. It's going to be in 100,000 magazines. You're not going to use the same editing method as your Instagram story. You're going to be tedious. You're going to make sure everything is perfect. Well, when it comes to Instagram, the photos are being viewed on such a small device, on such a small screen. You can actually get away with a little bit more than you could in a lot of other scenarios, like if you were printing it or having it in a gallery or something like that. So for me, if I know I'm posting a photo strictly just to my Instagram, I'm just sharing it to share it because I think it looks cool, I will take certain liberties in editing that push the photo farther than I normally would. I try to get the colors to be enhanced. I might do more with the exposure and the shadows, and this photo is a perfect example of that. So I want to show you my entire workflow from start to finish. So do me a solid before we get going today, hit that thumbs up button for me. It helps out the channel a lot, and it also helps the video be seen. With that intro out of the way, let's jump into Lightroom. That's what we're going to be using today, and let's get to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is crop this image. Because it is for Instagram, a square format is what I'm going to use. I use that primarily on my own Instagram. So in this photo, we're going to utilize a composition that's happening in front of us. Notice how we have the roads on the bottom and top of the photo, creating kind of like a circular pattern. So the two main subjects here are the building and Chris being in the street. And these roads kind of create like a lead line to where it leads your eye from one subject to another. So notice if you look at the building, the road leads you back down into the other road, which leads you into Chris, which leads you back up and around. It's a nice circular composition, so we want to take advantage of that with the crop. So I don't want to crop off either end of the road. Now I'm going to go to our basic adjustment, and I'm going to warm up the photo just slightly. In real life, this felt a little more warm. I got the white balance wrong in camera. No big deal. We will fix it here. Going to bring my tint a little bit more towards the purple side. Now we're going to do some basic adjustments. I might adjust these a little later on in the edit once we get through it. But I'm going to go ahead and bring my highlights down because the sunset, the sky was pretty well exposed. I'm going to bring our shadows up because the shadows obviously are pretty dark. The lighting wasn't the greatest here. It was pretty typical, end of daylight, a bright sky, dark shadows. So we're going to correct all that right here. I also did bring my contrast up, quick note. So we're correcting all that, highlights down, shadows up, whites up, and blacks up slightly. Going to move the contrast a little bit more. I want a lot of punch in this photo, and I think that looks pretty good. Y'all know I'm not a huge fan of clarity. I don't like a ton of it, so I'm going to bring that down just slightly into the negatives. Going to bring my vibrance up to really get some color into this, and just bring my saturation up very, very slightly. Nothing too crazy on this one. So now I'm going to drop down to the tone curve. Now, typically in a tone curve, I might do an S curve, which brings your shadows down and your highlights up. But for this, I'm going to skip over the shadow part. I'm going to drop a point in the middle and a point in the top right kind of fourth of this tone curve. I'm going to bring my bottom point up just a little bit to add in some fade on this image, not a lot. I'm going to bring my middle point over to the left to brighten up our image just a little bit. And I'm going to bring this top right corner point down and over just a little bit to bring in a little bit more highlight. And I think right there is looking pretty good. I'm bringing this bottom point down just a little bit to flatten everything out. I am going to bring my shadows down just slightly in the tone curve section. So I pivoted off of the point curve onto the tone curve. And I think for now, that looks good. We might adjust that later as well. So now we're going to drop in some vignette here, bring our corners, bring our eyes into the middle of the photo a little bit more. And I think that looks good. Now, this is the key step of this edit. We're going to take these graduated filters and we're going to start working with all the light we have in front of us. We have a pretty flat image. We've kind of worked it with the basic adjustments to look good. Now we're really going to morph all the light to look the way we want it to look. So first thing I'm doing is dropping down a slider on this top piece of the photo. I'm going to bring my highlights all the way down to make this sky pop. Going to bring my whites down as well, and I'm going to bring my saturation up to really get this sky looking good. Now I'm going to slide another graduated filter on the right side of the photo. Because of the way the sunset was, this left side is our brightest side of the image. It's most hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop a separated filter like we just did to bring the exposure down on this. So I'm going to bring that exposure slider down. Could bring my highlight slider down as well to kind of balance out this sky and make it look a little bit more uniform, because before that left side was super hot. Now I'm going to slide this down just a little bit more to get it to a nice point. Now you'll notice that the clouds on this left side are now very dark in the corner, and I don't like that, but it's a product of the graduated filter we just dropped in. So I'm going to drop in a shorter filter now to correct this. So basically we have one filter making a big adjustment. Now I'm going to drop another graduated filter on top of it just to fix that corner. So now our whites look solid right there. So now we just morphed all the light in the top of the photo, and we're going to do the exact same thing in the bottom of the photo. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring the saturation up on this filter I just slid in. I'm going to bring the exposure up a lot on this to brighten up this road. Now notice how I brought the filter in on the left side of our image slightly. This is important because the right side doesn't need to be brightened, only the left side. So we brought our exposure up and we brought our shadows up. Now we're going to do the exact same thing that I just did in the other corner. We made a large filter adjustment. Now I want to make a smaller adjustment because this corner doesn't need to be brightened up. It needs to be darkened to draw your eye into Chris. So we have that big one to brighten up the road. Now we have a smaller one. We're bringing the highlights down, the saturation, or excuse me, the shadows down, and we're going to bring the saturation slightly up to make that yellow line look a little bit more poppin', you see. Now we're going to slide a slider in on the right side of the photo, and now we're going to bring the exposure way down over here, because like I said, this is an unimportant part of the image. We need your eye to be drawn to Chris, and we need your eye to be drawn to that building. So we're dropping this filter in here, getting it positioned perfectly, and I'm bringing the exposure way down on it to darken this up. Notice how when we darken up this corner, your eye goes straight to Chris, which is what we want. He's the main subject of the photo. I'm going to bring the highlights down as well on this, and I'm going to bring my saturation up a little bit. Honestly, I don't know why I brought the saturation up. I'm watching this on replay doing the voiceover, but no big deal. Brought the saturation up. I stand by it. Now, we got all of our filters dropped in. Notice how huge of a difference that makes. We really manipulated the light. Now, I want Chris to pop out. That's what we've been doing this whole time. We've been focusing on our subject. So, I'm going to draw in a brush point right here, and I'm going to brush over Chris and bring the highlights up just to give a little bit more pop to this area. And I'm going to use the erase tool to erase off the parts that are unimportant. Think that looks good. There we go. Notice how Chris is kind of popping out just a little bit more. I didn't go over the top on this though. I'm also going to do this same adjustment to the road on the right side of the image. Now, I want this building to pop a little bit. We have this splash of orange from the sun setting on this building right here. It will provide really good contrast against the blue sky, and it's kind of a pivotal piece of the photo. So what I'm going to do is once again brush on over this. Going to bring the saturation way up on the slider and just brush that right there, and I think that looks pretty good. One last thing I'm going to brush in right here is notice how the left side of this road where we have this line, I want the line to stand out, but I don't need this left side of the road to stand out. I need people's eye to go to Chris. That's the whole point right here. So I'm going to bring the highlights and shadows down just a little bit on this left side of the road to try to make it stand out just slightly more. I think that looks pretty good. Nothing too crazy on that. So now I'm going to do some minor adjustments to this image. Because we've done so much with the exposure and so much with shadows, I'm going to add some noise reduction here. I'm going to bring the luminance up just a little bit, try to balance some of that out. I'm also going to hit the option key, and then I'm going to slide the masking option on my sharpening. So anything that's black won't be sharpened, anything that's white will be sharpened, so we won't have unnecessary sharpening noises in things like the sky and unnecessary parts of our image. Now this next step is more personal preference. I'm going to add a split tone in to get kind of more colors that I would commonly have in my photo. So for the highlight, I'm going to move this around, and for split toning, I just go off of what I think looks good. I want to add a little bit of pink in here, pinkish purple to contrast against the blue sky. And I typically like to have a little bit of orange or yellow in my shadows, kind of warm up the shadows. So what I'm going to do right here is just that, drop a purplish pink hue into the highlights and a orangish gold hue into the shadows. Now everything is a little bit too high on the saturation right here, so I'm going to slide the saturation on both down just a little bit, and I think we're getting to a pretty decent point. So I think at this point, everything on this tone curve looks good. I am going to bring my saturation down just a little bit to kind of balance everything out. Going to adjust my contrast just a little bit as well. And I'm going to go ahead and remove this dust spot in the sky. It's been bothering me the entire edit. It's just some dust on my sensor. We'll hit the stamp tool to get rid of that. And we're also going to go down to the road and hit the stamp tool here to get rid of all of these spots on the ground. But there's actually an easier way to do that because this is a post for Instagram, and I'll show you in a minute. So this image, I want to add a little more punch in before we're done. It's slightly flat. Now, instead of using the basic adjustment sliders, I'm going to use the tone curve sliders down here. I'm going to bring my darks down, I'm going to bring my lights up, and I'm going to bring my shadows down a little bit. These are just straight up adjustments. The tone curve, there's no algorithm or smartness to it. It's just straight up plus or minus, where basic adjustments can be more of a smart tool. So once I have those set, I typically don't like to adjust them because it's not one or the other. So tone curve is good to make that final little punch adjustment. We're going to export the photo at 3000 and high resolution, and we're good. I'm not going to change the resolution. We kept it at 300. So now we're going to head over to the phone. I'm going to airdrop this to myself, and I'm going to open the application Touch Retouch. Now this is an easy program that you can use on your phone to make removal adjustments from your image. Typically you'd want to do this in Photoshop if you're printing this or it's for a client, but because this is just for Instagram, it's okay to use an app. It's pretty quick, and then you can post it straight to IG. So we're going to use the brush tool, remove all the trash and nonsense from this image, anything we find distracting. Now I'm going to take the line tool and I'm going to remove these light posts. I removed the top of them with the brush tool. Now I'm going to remove the pull with the line tool. Now this one is a little tricky because there's so many elements involved with it. We can't remove the entire pull with that line tool. So I'm going to remove the top half with it. Then I'm going to remove the bottom. Doesn't work. So we're going to use the brush tool to take parts of it away piece by piece. Now this is not going to be perfect. That's why I said if this was for something other than Instagram, you're going to want to use Photoshop and be really precise. But for me, this is okay. We can get it done. So I'm going to use the brush tool and remove parts of it, and I'm going to use the clone stamp tool to stamp over certain areas, draw in missing pieces that aren't done by the software. Going to use the line tool one last time to remove this line over here perfectly, and I think that looks pretty good. The building's not super precise if you zoom in on it, but we're all good. Over here, you'll notice some imperfections in our edit. We used that brush tool and it didn't get close enough to the line, so I'm going to click on the stamp tool, and whenever I put that little circle, that's the selection point, and then wherever I paint with my finger, it's going to paint from that selection. So notice we have our selection point right there. As we paint, it just grabs from the selection, and we can bring our darkness, I guess, closer to that line and really clean up that edit. But from there, I think we're done. We can go ahead and click on the export and make sure we export at full size, save it as a copy, and we are good. So bang, there we go. That is it on the edit. Remember what I talked about at the beginning of the video. This is my editing workflow for Instagram, sharing photos on Instagram. If I happen to take this photo and I was gonna send it off to a magazine, or it was gonna be printed larger, be viewed larger, there might be some changes that I make in the edit. I'll go back and fine tune every detail. I'll make sure that none of the adjustments are bringing too much noise in. I will just be a little bit more tedious. But because the photo's going on Instagram, we can kind of cut a few corners and really try to make sure the photo pops and is taken to that next level, and that is exactly what we did today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, like I said, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button for more photography videos like this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you have any questions or there's any other editing techniques or things you see on my Instagram or something like that and you want me to talk about it or do other tutorials, let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Y'all are awesome, and I will see you next time.